Selina Cheng to my right, who's a reporter with HKO1 and a local language weekly paper and website, which has done a lot of good investigative work in the last couple of years since it was formed. Wen-Chin Fan from the Wall Street Journal, formerly of Bloomberg, and the New York Times in China, who's a veteran of investigative journalism, and Don Wineland, who's the Asia financial correspondent for the Financial Times here in Hong Kong, where he's been for about 4 years. We're going to talk about investigative reporting, but investigative reporting really are just using the same skills that reporters use in all of their reporting. Often what marks an investigation is something that takes a lot longer, is a lot more complex, and you have a lot more pieces to put together. And the same skills that apply to get the information and to telling the stories really apply to every story that we're writing when it's in longer form. Investigative journalism also has some kind of mystique. It's something everybody aspires to do, even though they're probably already doing it. But the realities of it is often very tough, exhaustive, and sometimes tedious work, and you can feel quite lonely, particularly if you're working on investigation on your own. The payoff, of course, is when you are able to publish a story, they have big impact and hopefully affect change. And public service journalism is still one of the most important things that it thrives in the world today. I'd like to start with Selina first, please.
Hi, everyone. So the main story that I did in the past year was about Harvey Weinstein's activities in Hong Kong and his local movie production partners' behaviors with actresses and other women in the movie industry. So the story talks about how Harvey Weinstein has had inappropriate behavior in very similar fashion that he has had with American actresses on U.S. soil, but which happened in Hong Kong. And the movie partner was, in some instances, responsible for putting them in touch, knowing that Harvey Weinstein has had doubtful behavior before, or at least a reputation, and how he imitated Harvey Weinstein in doing the same things, and even while doing it, leveraged his connection with Harvey Weinstein to make actresses, agree to his advances. So it's a story that's based on mostly interviewing with sources, face-to-face or through telephone, not much using documents or records. So I'd say it's a story that's based on a dozen sources that I've interviewed multiple times over the course of the project.
Can you say how you came up with the idea?
So it was at a meetup with some fellow reporters, and we were talking about the Harvey Weinstein news cycle and how crazy it was. And then one of the reporters, whom I've just met, actually suggested that Harvey Weinstein has come to Hong Kong before. And then we're all like, well, of course he's had visited Hong Kong because there's such a big movie industry here. So the next day, or maybe a day or two later, I called up a long-time childhood friend who happens to be a casting executive in the English movie industry in Hong Kong, so it's very specific. And she immediately said, don't have anything to do with Bey Logan, who's the partner of Harvey Weinstein in Hong Kong. And so when you're an investigative reporter, hearing that, you're like, okay, tell me more. Maybe I do want to have something to do with him. So this person connected me with a lot of actresses who were, subjects of rumors in the past, and it went on from there. Those actresses connected me with other subjects of rumors, and so the main gist was whether or not I was able to confirm those rumors and establish them as facts.
Thank you. And just to round out your story there, how did you persuade these sources to talk, and then how did you decide when you had sort of critical mass that you were confident that what you had was true, and how many sources did you require?
So most of the sources were victims of inappropriate behavior. Some of them don't think necessarily that they were victims. They knew something inappropriate was done to them. And the main thing that that allowed me to talk to them was to show that I cared about the story and that I knew some background to it. And by background, I mean I know sort of what the rumor was about and who the actors, who were the people in the rumors and the relationship between them. So usually I approached these sources through someone they already knew, which also often happened to be the person who first told me about the rumor. So say like so-and-so said they met with Harvey Weinstein at Mandarin Oriental, purportedly for this purpose. And so because it was really about intimate things that sometimes the ladies never really told others, they might be surprised that I knew about this because it came in form of a rumor. But I guess it really helped that there were people in the middle that vouched for me. And that the first person I approached already trusted my work as a reporter, that I wasn't gonna, sensationalize it as, for gossip magazines. So that really helped. And then the second thing is also to make myself available by meeting them in person and have very lengthy interviews of 3 or 4 hours to talk about something that happened over a course of a few weeks or months. What was the second part of your question? How did I establish?
Yes, when did you feel you had a sort of critical mass, a number of sources and complaints that convinced you that the story was true and you could publish?
It actually happened very fast and there were a lot of people that I was able to know of, at least to start with, because the movie industry and the English language part of the movie industry in Hong Kong is very small. So there was a sense of community and everybody knew everybody. There were lots of gossips. Some people think those gossips were true, some not necessarily so. So I think in terms of the bulk of rumors, show that there is a story, but it doesn't show that the story is true. So by establishing, say, one of the stories was about an Indonesian Chinese actress. She's on the record for this story, so I could talk about it. She was cast for a lead role for a movie, and over the course of the production, she was subjected to very abusive behavior. And I was able to confirm them as true by asking people to corroborate for me, either people who were on movie sets who saw what happened, who saw maybe not what happened, but what happened before and after. And sometimes you can't confirm one event was true, especially because it happened in a hotel room where there is no eyewitness, or that the person has never told other people what happened. But you could see them say, you can establish that on this date, around this time of the year, at this hotel, they did meet, there was a meeting. So sometimes that's the best kind of corroboration you can get. And other type of corroboration for especially assault cases is when the victim complained to people close to them shortly afterwards. So I think that's a very, I was lucky because American journalists and New York Times and so forth have already done a lot of reporting on Harvey Weinstein, and I didn't have any experience in this type of sexual harassment stories. So I was able to take the example of what US journalists has been doing. So one of the examples is the actress had an encounter, and then following that, she found her best friend to help her draft an email and send it to the movie partner to complain to him about what just happened the night before, and I'm going to stop our partnership right now. So that's very good material you could get as a reporter, because you have a third person who's not involved in the industry and the relationships, but who was able to confirm with you that this did happen. She complained to me, and then we drafted the email together. The victim herself was not able to produce the email. She said she, it was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, she couldn't find the email, but her best friend was able to find it as a draft note in her email account. So yeah, sometimes that's, you can't get the best corroboration you could get to verify something is true, but you can get the next best, and sometimes the next best is already pretty strong.
Thank you. We'll come back to that very interesting story shortly. I just wanted to bring Don in now because talk about a different style of investigation on which relied very heavily on corporate records in your North Korean shipping network story.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So this story started with I think a desire from the FT to, tell the story about North Korea's connections to Hong Kong, North Korea's links to Hong Kong through shipping companies. But I think, kind of at a deeper level, we also wanted to be able to profile the companies that are behind this kind of business, and also identify the types of people that are involved in this kind of work. I think all good business or financial reporting often comes down to who are the people behind the money, or I guess in this case the shipping companies and the coal or oil or whatever's heading to North Korea. So that was the original goal, was to identify links between Hong Kong and North Korea. For those of you that aren't familiar with this topic, maybe I can just give 30 seconds background information. It's very easy to set up a company in Hong Kong. It's a good place to open a shell company that can be used to do lots of other things that don't necessarily have anything to do with business in Hong Kong. So a lot of Chinese-backed companies have used this jurisdiction to do business with North Korea. It's quite well reported, I think, over the years. But what we wanted to do was use public records and use the information that we had available to us to really map out some of these companies and the networks that these companies operate in, and the people that are behind that. So I thought what I could do is just actually go through some of the sources of public information that I used for this, and kind of demonstrate how I was able to kind of map out some of these companies. So for anybody that's done corporate reporting in Hong Kong, you're probably familiar with the Icarus system, which is a corporate registry that gives you quite limited information on people and companies, but and it also comes at a cost. You can rack up a couple $100 quite quickly doing research through this registry. So that's kind of a primary source for all corporate information in Hong Kong, at least when it comes to identifying the people and the names of the companies, past companies that people have been involved with. But that's about it. It doesn't give you a whole lot more information. That you can find people's passport numbers here to match them up with other records if you're able to find records elsewhere. So that was one source that I used. There are a variety of marine intelligence services that exist for free. Equisys is the one that I used. Equisys will give you everything from the managers and owners of ships, the ships that are controlled by certain companies. You can kind of, it's a good tool that will take you through these kinds of networks. If you're not careful, you can spend hours and hours and hours just digging through it and not getting really anywhere. Another interesting thing about Equisys is it provides a record of disciplinary reports from ports around the region, so it can give you a sense of what a ship actually looks like. There are reports that are included in the system that will tell you that the hull of the boat was corroded and it was cited for a safety violation in Weihai or something like that in China. Another important tool is some kind of shipping tracking service. I use marine traffic. We'll show you where a boat's been in the not too distant past. It's hard to track things down much further than maybe a couple months, but and that will also show you the flags of convenience that ships have been using. You can go back and track down all of the different owners through this system. And then the last tool would be some kind of Chinese corporate registry system, like the one that I use is Tianyancha, which will give you ownership behind companies. And this can be useful at times, but it's also can be quite difficult to use and quite difficult to find out who's actually behind companies using this kind of system. But anyways, through these relatively public forms of information, we were able to really build up kind of a network and identify companies that appeared to be doing lots of business with North Korea and people as well. We were able to find people that were willing to talk with us eventually that are involved in this business. And for me, that was kind of the most interesting part, was tracking down some of the players behind this. And I think when most of us think about people that are doing business with North Korea, we probably think they're criminals and terrible people. But really, I mean, a lot of these people are just they're normal traders based in northern China that have been doing business between lots of different jurisdictions, including North Korea. So if anything, this kind of deep dive really puts a very human face on things that we wouldn't originally we might think there's very nefarious people behind some of these operations. One note on sourcing for this. So in this specific story, we didn't quote any anonymous sources or anything like that, but background sourcing was incredibly important for this. Having people, sanctions lawyers and people that are ready to kind of hop on the phone quickly and discuss some of these things is incredibly important for doing this kind of story when it comes to trying to understand some of how the sanctions work, or research institutes are also important when it comes to talking about individuals that are that might be on the that OFAC in the U.S. might be tracking down, but has not been listed yet on an official sanctions registry. So yeah, I think the point here on sourcing is that just because anonymous sources don't pop up in the story, there are a lot of people that we would be in contact with for this kind of story that are really kind of essential to making sure that we're getting things right.
Thanks. Where did you get your original lead for the companies to start sort of peeling the onion?
Well, the reason why we started looking into this, I mean, one reason was we were actually looking at the financial links with North Korea and China, Hong Kong, and other jurisdictions. You might remember last year, SWIFT began cutting its final ties with North Korean banks, and that was kind of for me, someone who covers finance, that was kind of an initial way of getting into this, and I guess one thing led to another, and pretty soon I was tracking down shipping companies.
Thanks. Maybe we'll come back to rabbit holes in a bit. I want to introduce Wenxin into the conversation. Wenxin, I believe you want to talk more about, once you've done the sort of the document dive, how you then do the gumshoeing that's necessary to build up a story.
So, like Dan, I spent hours and hours in those shipping websites, and I didn't go anywhere near a publishable story. So that's the risk of investigative reporting. You can be very, dedicated to something, but it may not always lead somewhere. I joined the journal about 8 months ago, which is apparently not enough to, roll out a published big project. So I'm going to talk about the story I did with Bloomberg, my previous employer, about 3 years ago. It's about hunting down fugitive officials, and this was pre-Go and Gui. This was 2 years before Go and Gui. So China just rolled out this program called initially called Fox Hunt, and then they gave another code name called Skynet, which is basically trying to round up corrupted officials who has fled abroad. So I was very good at selling, story ideas to my editors without even know how I can do this. So I did just that, and they were like, "Okay, you need to do that, and you need to have an anecdote, have a case, have a story that can, support a series that's readable." Because I was I was working for Business Week magazines, so it's aimed to be a feature. It didn't end up as a feature. Anyhow, I spent about 3 months trying to convince CCDI, the anti-corruption agency back then led by Wang Qishan, to give me an interview, not himself, but the office responsible for Sky Hunt. And they already published a list of 100 people they wanted to nail down. And so I was sort of combing through the names and trying to focus on someone who is interesting and who is, whose story is doable for us. And we ended up kind of focusing on this guy named Qiao Jianjun. He's a grain official from Zhoukou, Henan, central China, and he's embedded millions of dollars, and he's gone nowhere. What's good about him is he ended up in Seattle and in a house with his wife, and their case has been taken by DOJ, the U.S. side, as one of the rare examples that the U.S. is cooperating with China, to sort of hunt down those officials. So there is available documents on them. Like there is a DOJ indictment, which kind of illustrates, how, basically the evidence China gave the U.S. With some corroboration from the U.S. side, because in this rare case, U.S. sent an investigator into China and had a chance to, talk to people, went to Zhoukou and sort of confirmed the evidence China had. So that was the story. And so the task wasn't proving, he is corrupted, because that part was already done by the China side and by the U.S. side. The task was to build up on what we could see in the indictment, which was pretty dry, right? He took this amount of money, goes somewhere, and to find enough details to build up a narrative. Basically, we already have the skeleton from the documents, but we need the meat. So that was my job, and I did the story with 2 brilliant colleagues at Bloomberg, Keith Jai, I wrote it, many people here know about him, and Drew Lawrence, based in Beijing. And so we got the US document, and we were very lucky to got a document from China, which is basically, the local authorities' investigation on the guy. And that piece of information has a list of names and addresses of Qiao's relatives. So I was tasked to go there with this list, and try to find people to talk to. So I went there one day on the train with a colleague, and I was very happy because it was very, it was a very rare situation where the Chinese authority would give you that. And this is not like from the CCDI, this is some sources giving us documents. But after one day, of course, I knocked on a lot of doors and I called all the numbers, and nobody would talk to me, because these are all, relatives, the sisters and sister-in-laws of the official, of the guy. So dead end. What do I do? So the next thing I could do, and luckily I came prepared. Other than this document and addresses, I have some other names of officials who work with Qiao, his friends. And this was from the documents I dug up by combing, public documents, school pages where you see, who he went to school with, his teachers, and legal documents done, probably have seen some of those too, where, you have a case in Zhoukou involving grain officials recently. So that's how you collected a bunch of names. And with those names, you go into the city and you try to find them. But of course, when I went to the office of the Grain Bureau, nobody would talk to me. So luckily, I had some experience tracking down people. So I went to the what you might call the dormitory of the grain bureaus, like it's like public housing initially. So all the grain officials and workers live together in one, or actually several compounds. So I started knocking on doors there, and eventually I found someone who were like a deputy to him and would talk to me about, this guy, and give me some very good colors, that he wasn't always appear to be corrupted, that he and his wife was divorced, but nobody knew about it, stuff like that. And I also found a legal document, like a court document, before I went, that involved another case. Like because of the embezzlement, someone was bribing him. So that guy was charged in China, and there was a document on that which has a lot of data. So went to the lawyer and got that document, which actually mentioned this case and gave me color of this guy. Like he took him money sitting in a car every time they met, and before he escaped to the U.S., he was in the same car and he left the car in the airport. This is not like super revealing in terms of nailing down corruption itself. This is more like, building out the narrative, having enough meat and details to tell a story once you have the documents. So I skipped the document part, but I think it's the same kind of work as you mentioned. When you're in the field, you're parachuted into a strange city. What do? Nobody there basically, and it takes patience. And I think the trick is if you prepared well enough and you have enough leads to chase, and just be patient, and statistically someone will talk to you. That's the lesson that I learned.
Thank you. One, I know you've all done document dives. Selena, we talked about a source story, but I know you've done big document chases before. And as someone myself who spent many hours going down rabbit holes on Icarus and other corporate records services, can you just briefly say how you organize your reporting at the outset and make sure you keep your goal in mind of the story? Because it's often so easy just to amass a huge amount of information that ultimately is interesting but doesn't necessarily amount to proving what you set out to prove. Selena? Is that good?
Something I find always useful, especially when it's a complex story involving a lot of characters and events, is a timeline. So I work a lot with Google Drive, Google Docs. So I always have one document that's a timeline where I map out every incident for which I have a date. Sometimes no day, just the month and year. Key events, you highlight it. And then I have another document, which is usually a spreadsheet of sources. So I categorize the sources in terms of whether they're experts, lawyers, perpetrators, victims, government representatives, NGOs, things like that. So I think those two really give you a sense, an overview of what you've got so far. And going back to them always refreshes your memories when things are getting murky or too complicated. And reviewing your list of all the sources you've tried to approach or already approached could, sometimes you wonder, okay, I got this other piece of information, can I corroborate it with someone I already called like 3 months ago? So these two are the main tools I use.
Thanks. And how often do you decide that a story, it's not worth the amount of effort or time that it's going to take to prove what you need?
The best thing is when you have deadlines, because it's something that's timely. You have to get it out within a month, else nobody is going to pay attention to it. The next best is if you have an editor who have strict deadlines for you. Otherwise, when you have a project that's been going on, it's not timely, you could dive into a rabbit hole. Sometimes you get breakthroughs that really encourage you to go on, but then after a while, you sort of have a sense that it's going stagnant. You haven't had a breakthrough in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Sources you really want to talk to are not calling you back after, a long while. And then you just sort of have to decide that, even if I keep calling these 5 people, the stuff that I'm going to get back is not going to change significantly the tone or the direction of my story. So you just leave it there and start writing, because it's almost always for me the most difficult part. And then maybe if you have some free time, then you just decide to text or call back that source when you feel like it. And you never know. Sometimes they open the door for you. If it doesn't, it doesn't matter. You still have your story.
Thank you. Don, since presumably you had networks of dozens, if not hundreds of companies and names to pull together, how do you go about that?
I feel like I should have rabbit hole in my title somewhere. I personally, I feel like I spend far too much time going down rabbit holes that often do not turn up anything noteworthy. In terms of organization, I think when you're doing research on companies, if you're able to input those names into Google Docs is nice, because you can search for any name anytime through hundreds of separate documents, and you can locate the name that you're looking for. So if you have been, I think a lot of the rabbit hole reporting is tying together different pieces of information that you've come across. Sometimes, maybe you spend a couple hours looking into a company and you put it down and you don't come back to it for 6 months. But when you do need to get back to that research, being able to access it quickly and being able to use the time that you've put in the past is very important. So I think, Google Docs is an excellent way of doing that. Personally, I think one of the only ways to reduce your rabbit hole time is the use of sources, and have people pointing you in the right direction, have people steering you away from things that ultimately will lead nowhere. That could possibly be the best way to reduce the amount of time you spend going down the rabbit hole.
Thanks. And Wenxin, I declare an interest as we've worked together on stories over the years, and some stories have had many box files of documents and evidence, and somehow Wenxin seems to keep it in his head, but presumably you have a written way of ordering stuff as well.
I do, but I had bad experience with Excel sheets, so I don't use it anymore. And now I use this very simple thing everybody knows called folders, because I like to see documents as data points. Like for me, a company name is a data point, a person's name is a data point, a telephone number is a data point. So in my computer, I have a lot of folders. Under like one giant project name, like I have folders of 10 different key players. And then I have another maybe 10 different key companies. And I put related, relevant files into those folders. I print, like I save PDF pages a lot, and there are a lot of PDFs in those pages. And sometimes I put the same page in different folders because they're relevant. I find it a better way it works for me better than Excel sheet. So that's how I work. So whenever I want to, go back into something, usually you build your mind around a person or a company, right? Like you're chasing a lead. That lead might be this character, you want to know everything about him, or this company, you want to know every player in this company, what business they have done. So you go to those different routes. So I find the folder organization works for me. But I also is someone who kind of reorganize my shelves every 2 weeks, if you know what I mean. Like my shelves get very nasty and disorganized and cannot work with it anymore. Then I reorganize it. Sometimes I put some posters on my desktop, and it's just kind of my chaotic mind on my desktop. And you got into those rabbit holes, then you realize, you need a system, and that system, the folders work for me.
Thank you. I'd like to open up to the floor for any questions.
Hi, I'm with AP. I'm not sure this is a question that's relevant to all of you, and maybe it's just from reporting in China. When we deal with sensitive investigations, we're always worried about, how to protect the information in the work that we're doing. I just wanted to ask if you have these shared, do you share these concerns? Do you consider Google to be safe? Do you do are there extra layers or protection that you use to sort of make sure that, this information isn't seen by anyone else who it shouldn't be seen by?
Someone answer? Both two of you use Google, so maybe Don or Selena can answer that first.
I mean, quickly, I would say for very sensitive documents, I mean, it's best to use some kind of encrypted service to send those kinds of documents across borders. And if you're in China, I mean, Google doesn't really work anyway, so. Yeah, I mean, I think there's huge concerns over the information that we come up with being intercepted at some point.
And Selena, maybe just to follow on from that, in terms of, how do you protect sources' identities if sources might be in documents or notes that you've kept?
So I'm not sure whether it was for this story or another one, I can't recall, but it was someone who, it was actually a mistake I've made because I knew, so it was for this Harvey Weinstein story. There was an actress who's a little bit well known in Hong Kong, and I heard some rumors about her of very grave incidents. And I actually discussed this with my colleagues as I was reaching out to her. And when I reached out to her, she over telephone, I realized that she's very, very, very on edge about this, and she didn't want to talk to me because if she told me, even if she was off record or on background, then my colleagues or editors would know about it. So I think this is something that you should be aware of. I guess I wasn't aware of when I. There are things that you can't tell your editor. In terms of keeping electronic information safe, I think Google, there was someone who made an analogy about the security of Google is that it has a hard shell. So every service you use on Google, it has a hard shell, but anything that inside is like jelly. So if somebody has your Gmail password, or enters your Gmail account, they have access to your Google Photos, Google Drive. They probably could log into your Facebook because you use your Gmail to open your Facebook account. So the best thing you could do is really two-factor authentication, long passwords. These are the two best things that you could do. Change your passwords regularly. Myself, I'm not constantly working on stories about mainland China. But I currently use a VPN on my home network as well as on my cell phone, even in Hong Kong. So it's sort of, the day-to-day thing that you could already do. And when you stumble across a highly sensitive story, it's sort of already too late for you to have that infrastructure in place. So I think it's important that it becomes every day for you.
Thank you. And Wenxia, maybe you could just address the issue of WeChat, which is kind of the ubiquitous way of talking to people in China now, and how a lot of people sources do want to use that for talking, and how you deal with those kind of situations.
I don't think I talk to those sensitive sources on WeChat. I assume my phone is being tapped, and I assume all the WeChat conversation is not safe. So I definitely won't use that to talk to someone who doesn't want the government to know. Having said that, I think there's very little thing you could do, actually. I mean, having worked with New York Times and Bloomberg and the Journal, those, pretty big organizations that has the resource to, try to protect the data security, right? And we do what we can, but I'm not 100% sure that like the communication wasn't compromised. Except if, like, I've done some quite sensitive work, and if it had been compromised for those work, I would have known, and that didn't happen, so I assume it was okay. But just on a day-to-day basis, I don't talk to people on WeChat on things that I consider sensitive.
Thank you. Other questions? At the back. In the middle there.
Dan Strump with the Wall Street Journal. I was just wondering if you guys have a kind of methodology for choosing targets of investigations. Where, how do you decide this is ripe for a deep dive of 6 months, 9 months, a year? Is that a tough process? What's your thinking on that?
Who wants to take?
We'll address that. I don't want to share too many secrets with the Wall Street Journal, but I think there's really two ways that we come across some of the bigger deep dive targets. One would be in a meeting where we're discussing some of our priorities, and we home in on a person or a company, and we decide we need to know more about this person, this organization. And that's a good way into or it at least has been a way into lots of the bigger stories that we've done. Personally, I mean, I find some of the more interesting stories that I've worked on have started with coming across a name in a document and holding on to it for a bit, coming back to it, and at some point making a link with another interesting organization or another interesting person and pushing it on from there.
Okay, anybody else?
I guess most of the time you don't decide that you're going to spend the next 6 months doing something. There are occasions like that. That's usually when you're dealing with a huge amount of data. You want to collect information about like 10 families, things like that. It's not going to be soon just because of the nature of your investigation. But many times your goal isn't that. Like if you want to map out this North Korea thing with this Hong Kong shipping company, you go in and it's not an easy job. You need to go through lots of documents, lots of names, and it's just the sheer amount of data will naturally decide that you're not going to finish it in the next 2 weeks. I guess the question is, how do you put a deadline to stuff? And that goes back to the rabbit hole question. It's really hard to say, hey, I'm gonna do this in 6 months and done. That's not the way I work.
So the way that in our newsroom work is that we have an excellent editor who's an expert on public records in Hong Kong. So we have a routine of checking the people that we're interested in, say all the top level officials in Hong Kong, I could imagine the same being done for a list of companies that you're interested in, or a list of CEOs or whoever that you're interested in, and just regularly do a quick scan of all the updates on these organizations or people. So for example, for us, the public officials, we regularly go to the government headquarters to scan their recent interest declarations, where they've bought new houses, sold houses, and then we make a quick search on ICRIS for whether there's any changes in directorships of the companies they hold, things like that. So it's like scanning the terrain with a radar, and if you do it regularly and routinely and with discipline, then there's bound to be something that pops up. And because the list that you've already started to have at the beginning is of a list of important institutions or people, then whenever it pops up, it has to be something that's important. Yeah.
Thank you. A question over there.
Thanks. Ben Bland from the Financial Times. My question's to Selena. We've heard a lot in the last few years about pressure on press freedom in Hong Kong in particular. So have you noticed your investigative work in Hong Kong in particular getting more difficult, or in fact, as sort of Beijing's growing interventions a great source of new stories?
Thank you for the question. And I think it's where I work is very interesting. For those who don't know the background, HK01 is started by a very rich real estate businessman from the mainland. And we're actually 100% based in Hong Kong, but he also owns other media and cinema ventures in the mainland. And as this happens, we also steer politically towards pan-democrat, and we have a very strong investigative team. What this means is that your publisher has strong ties to Beijing and mainland business world, and it has happened that that stories were deleted from the website the next day it was published. This happened not long ago when we published some historically declassified files about June 4th from the UK. Everybody on the team was surprised because we never had an issue about June 4th before. But apparently it was because the publisher got a note and it was immediately deleted without any, memo given to us. Otherwise, I think press freedom in Hong Kong, well, we all know that in theory we have it, but in practice, for local reporters, it always comes in a form of whisper, what you can and what you can't do. So I think, I hope I'm not going to get into trouble for saying this later. But so Teresa Chang, the new Justice Secretary, story with her illegal constructions was a huge thing in Hong Kong local press. Everybody hounded in on her after Ming Pao broke the story. We did as well. And it continued for weeks, and there were, more and more like little things that we discovered that were, not true or not right. And at some point, you just saw that the news cycle sort of died out. And I just want to say it didn't die out naturally, because within my team, our editors were sort of very elusively saying like, okay, let's move on from her and do something else, because some people you never know who exactly how they said it when they said it, but they would say, let's like take a step back and just let her do her job because she's just newly nominated, and we move on to something else. So it's a new experience for me too. I'm still early on in my career, but it's never, like company sends a memo saying you can't do this anymore. It's much more elusive. Yeah.
Thank you. At the back. I think this is time for one last question. So.
Hi, and just to wrap up, I'd like to ask the panel a quick question. My name is Noah, and I report on Chinese capital markets for Euromoney. The work that I do is much less investigative, but I'd like to ask the panel, to what extent has the company you work for or your news outlet's title helped or hinder your investigation? So in other words, has it helped you talk to your sources? Are they more willing to come forward? Or is it the other way around? Thank you.
It's a difficult question to answer because probably better for Wen Xin, given that you've worked at many different organizations. I would say that generally, people trust the FT, and that is certainly something that will help people with sensitive information come forward to us because they know that we will likely treat it in a professional manner. Wenqin, I'm curious to know, across the different brands and news services, does it vary?
It does vary when you are working on maybe political sensitive stories. And this is a kind of a not accurate comparison because I worked in 3 news organizations in different time, and time is changed. So the New York Times is definitely the most sensitive brand name in China because I talked to a lot of people in China, political stories, and Bloomberg in this case is the least sensitive because this is known. Well, many people, not enough people know about it, and many people still see it as a pure, business news organization. And journal is somewhere in between, I would assume. I'm still new here, but. On the other hand, the brand name is also what gets people to talk to you because if you're in an investigation, you're dealing with something people don't want to talk to, they don't want to talk to you if you're with some unknown brand, right? This is something secret. This is something sensitive to them. If you have a way to convince them to talk to you, to talk to someone, they want to trust the brand, right? So this actually helps when you've reached a point where the guy actually wanted to talk and he's kind of choosing the outlet to talk to. And on that sense, I don't think these 3 places I work to are that different as long as they know about the brand name. I mean, I don't think there is like a more left-wing or more right-wing or more sort of political sensitive measurement on that once you reach that point.
Thanks. And Selena, I mean, you, when it comes to interviewing people, obviously yours is actually quite a new organization, so interested to hear how.
Yeah, so most people, they're just like, HK what? So it doesn't matter, I just tell them, we're relatively new, been here for 2 or 3 years. My name is Selena, I'm a reporter, or I'm an investigative reporter, depends on who I'm talking to. But I always, try to assure them that, we're based in Hong Kong and cater to a local audience. And we have done investigations in the past about this and this and this. And so they have a sense of what you usually do. So I don't think the brand helped or handicapped me in terms of the publication. And in terms of the investigative reporter's title, then it's something that you're free to use or not use. It's up to the situation, I guess.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks so much for the panelists.